The train whistle screamed through the Montana territory like a wounded animal, and as Catherine Hartwell pressed her gloved hand against the soot-stained window, she wondered if fleeing Philadelphia had been the bravest or most foolish decision of her 22 years. The year was 1876, and the continent stretched wild and untamed beyond the fragile thread of railroad tracks that carried her westward. Catherine's fingers trembled slightly as she adjusted the emerald brooch at her collar, the only piece of jewelry she had not sold to fund this desperate journey. Behind her lay a life of suffocating propriety, a canceled engagement to a banker's son who spent more time with his mistress than his betrothed, and a father who valued social standing over his daughter's happiness. Ahead lay uncertainty, opportunity, and a position as a schoolteacher in a settlement called Silver Ridge that she had accepted through correspondence alone. The conductor's voice boomed through the passenger car. "Silver Ridge, next stop, Silver Ridge in 5 minutes." Catherine gathered her carpetbag and straightened her traveling dress, a practical Navy affair that had seen better days. Through the window, she could see the settlement emerging from the wilderness like a collection of children's blocks scattered across the valley floor. Rough-hewn buildings lined a single main street, surrounded by endless forests of pine and mountains that scraped the brilliant blue sky. It was nothing like Philadelphia, nothing like anything she had ever known. The train shuddered to a halt with a screech of brakes and a cloud of steam. Catherine descended the metal steps carefully, her boots meeting the dusty platform with a soft thud. The mountain air hit her immediately, crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and something wild she could not name. She stood there for a moment, clutching her bag, as other passengers hurried past her toward waiting wagons and familiar faces. No one came to greet her. The platform emptied quickly, leaving Catherine standing alone as the train began its departure, the rhythmic chug of the engine fading into the distance. She squared her shoulders and started toward what appeared to be the main street, her heels clicking against the wooden boardwalk. Men in dusty work clothes paused to stare as she passed. A woman in a faded calico dress hurried children along with barely a glance in her direction. The general store seemed the logical place to inquire about the schoolhouse and her expected lodgings. Catherine pushed through the door, a small bell announcing her arrival. Inside, the store smelled of tobacco, leather, and coffee. A portly man with spectacles perched on his nose looked up from behind the counter. "Help you, miss?" he asked, his tone neither welcoming nor hostile. "I am Catherine Hartwell, the new schoolteacher," she said, lifting her chin with more confidence than she felt. "I was told accommodations would be arranged." The storekeeper's expression shifted to something like dismay. "The schoolteacher? You are a woman." "That is generally considered an asset in the teaching profession," Catherine replied coolly. No, you do not understand." The man came around the counter, wringing his hands. "We were expecting a man. The town council voted for a male teacher. There has been some mistake." The words hit Catherine like a physical blow, but she refused to let it show. "I have a signed contract from the Territorial Education Board. I sold everything I owned to come here. There has been no mistake on my part." "The schoolhouse has been empty for 6 months," the storekeeper continued, looking genuinely distressed. "And the teacher's cabin, well, it is hardly fit for a lady. The roof leaked all winter, and no one has made repairs." Catherine felt her carefully constructed plans crumbling around her. She had spent every penny on the journey west, had burned every bridge behind her. "Then I will repair it myself," she said firmly. "I came here to teach, and that is what I intend to do." Before the storekeeper could respond, the door behind Catherine opened with such force that the bell nearly flew off its hook. She turned to see a man who seemed to fill the entire doorway, and her breath caught in her throat. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to block out the afternoon sun streaming through the entrance. His hair fell past his shoulders in waves of dark brown, and a thick beard covered the lower half of his face. But it was his eyes that captured Catherine's attention, clear blue like mountain lakes, assessing her with an intensity that made her heart hammer against her ribs. He wore buckskin clothing that spoke of the wilderness, and muscles strained against the leather as he moved into the store with surprising grace for such a large man. "Caleb," the storekeeper said, relief evident in his voice. "This here is Miss Hartwell. She says she's the new schoolteacher, but there has been some confusion." The man called Caleb studied Catherine for a long moment, his gaze moving from her carefully pinned hair to her dusty traveling dress and back to her face. She forced herself to meet his eyes, refusing to be intimidated despite the fact that he could probably break her in half without effort. "You came all the way from the east to teach in Silver Ridge?" His voice was deep, roughened by the elements, but not unkind. "I did," Catherine said, "and I intend to fulfill my contract." Something shifted in Caleb's expression, though Catherine could not quite read it through the beard. "The teacher's cabin is in bad shape. Been empty since old Jameson died last fall. Roof has more holes than a sieve, and the stove is rusted through." "Then I will make repairs," Catherine repeated, though her heart sank at this confirmation of her circumstances. "You know how to patch a roof." There was no mockery in the question, only genuine curiosity. "I will learn." Caleb was silent for another moment, then seemed to come to some decision. "I'm heading up to my place in the high country tomorrow, but I can help you get the cabin livable today, unless you have better offers." Catherine glanced at the storekeeper, who suddenly found something fascinating to examine on his ledger. "I would be grateful for any assistance," she said carefully. "Get what supplies you need from Horace here," Caleb said, nodding toward the storekeeper. "Tar paper for the roof, stovepipe, whatever else. I will bring my tools and meet you at the cabin in an hour." Before Catherine could respond, or even thank him properly, Caleb was gone, the door swinging shut behind him with considerably less force than when he had entered. She turned back to Horace, who was already moving toward the back shelves. "That is Caleb Stone," Horace said, as if the name should mean something to Catherine. "Mountain man. Traps, hunts, brings pelts down to trade every few months. Has a cabin somewhere high up in the wilderness, though no one knows exactly where. Not much for society, but he is honest as they come. If he says he will help, he will." Catherine nodded, trying to process this information while Horace piled supplies on the counter. She had enough money left for the materials and perhaps a few weeks of food, but then she would be entirely dependent on receiving her teaching salary. The town council would have to honor her contract, surely. They could not simply refuse to pay her because she was a woman. Could they? She pushed the worry aside and focused on the present, one problem at a time. First, make the cabin habitable. Then worry about the school, the students, and her future in this wild place that seemed determined to reject her before she had even begun. An hour later, Catherine stood before the teacher's cabin and fought the urge to cry. It was worse than she had imagined. The small structure leaned slightly to one side, several window panes were broken, and the door hung crookedly on its hinges. Through the gaps in the roof, she could see blue sky. Could be worse. Catherine spun around to find Caleb approaching, a heavy toolbox in one hand and a ladder balanced on his shoulder as if it weighed nothing. Up close, she could see the weathered quality of his skin, the small scars that marked his hands and forearms, evidence of a life lived hard and outdoors. "How, exactly, could it be worse?" Catherine asked, unable to keep the despair entirely out of her voice. "Could be on fire," Caleb replied, and she thought she detected the faintest hint of humor in his tone. Despite everything, Catherine felt her lips twitch toward a smile. "That's a rather low standard for optimism." "Optimism is dangerous out here," Caleb said, setting down his tools. "Better to expect the worst and be pleasantly surprised." He studied the cabin with a practiced eye. "Roof first. Cannot fix anything inside until we keep the weather out. You afraid of heights?" "I do not know," Catherine admitted. "I have never been particularly high up." "Then you can hand me supplies from the ground and learn about your roof situation another day." Caleb positioned the ladder with quick efficiency, tested its stability, and began climbing before Catherine could even process that they were truly doing this. She spent the next several hours doing exactly as instructed, handing up tools and materials, holding the ladder steady, and trying not to stare at the way Caleb's muscles flexed and shifted beneath his buckskin shirt as he worked. He moved with the confidence of a man completely at home in his body, each movement economical and precise. Sweat dampened his hair, making it curl at the ends where it brushed his shoulders. "You from Philadelphia?" Caleb asked at one point, not looking down from his work. "How did you know?" "Says so on your traveling trunk. Saw it on the platform." "Yes," Catherine confirmed. "I lived there all my life until 5 days ago." "Long way to come." He hammered a nail with 3 powerful strikes. Running from something or toward something? The question was more perceptive than Catherine had expected. Both, I suppose. I was engaged to a man who did not love me, living in a house where I was valued only for my ability to make a good match. I wanted to be useful, to matter. Caleb was quiet for a moment, the only sound the rhythmic hammering. Teaching matters. Kids out here do not get much in the way of education. Most parents are too busy surviving to worry about books and numbers. "Do you have children?" Catherine asked, then immediately regretted the forward question. "No." The single word was flat, discouraging further inquiry on that particular topic. They worked in silence for a while longer. The sun tracked across the sky, and Catherine's arms ached from holding supplies aloft, but she refused to complain. If Caleb could work in the harsh sunlight without rest, she could certainly manage her smaller tasks. By late afternoon, the roof was patched and a new stovepipe installed. Caleb climbed down from the ladder for the last time and surveyed his work with a critical eye. "That will hold until winter. Come spring, you will want someone to replace the whole thing properly, but it will keep you dry for now." "I cannot thank you enough," Catherine said sincerely. "What do I owe you for your time?" Caleb's expression suggested she had said something vaguely offensive. "Nothing. Out here, we help each other. You will do the same for someone else when the time comes." He moved to the door and pushed it open with his shoulder, the warped wood scraping against the frame. Inside was a single room, dusty and cobwebbed, with a crude bed frame, a table, 2 chairs, and the newly repaired stove. A cabinet hung open on one hinge, revealing empty shelves. "Floor is solid at least," Caleb said, testing the boards with his weight. "Stove draws properly now. You will need firewood. Water from the creek is about 100 yards that way." He pointed through the broken window. "Do you know how to build a fire?" Catherine lifted her chin. "I can learn." Something like respect flickered in Caleb's blue eyes. "Stubborn. You will need that out here." He moved to the stove and began laying kindling with the ease of long practice. "Watch. You make a nest of small dry twigs, then add slightly bigger pieces in a pyramid. Leave space for air to flow. Fire needs to breathe, same as anything living." Catherine watched carefully, memorizing each step. Caleb struck a match against the stove, cupped the tiny flame with his large hands, and touched it to the kindling. Smoke curled upward, then a small flame caught and grew. "Add bigger wood gradually," he continued, suiting action to words. "Too much at once, you will smother it. Too little, it will burn out. It is a balance." "Like most things in life, I imagine," Catherine said softly. Caleb looked at her then, really looked at her, and Catherine felt something shift in the air between them, something she could not name but felt in the sudden quickening of her pulse. His eyes held intelligence and something else, a loneliness perhaps that mirrored her own. "I will bring you wood before I head up the mountain tomorrow," he said, breaking the moment, "enough to last a few weeks. After that, you will need to arrange with someone in town or gather your own." "You are leaving tomorrow?" Catherine was surprised by the disappointment that lanced through her. "I only come down when I need supplies or have pelts to trade. My life is up there." He gestured vaguely toward the mountains that dominated the eastern horizon, not suited for towns and people. "Yet you helped me today. A stranger. You needed help." He said it as if that explained everything, and perhaps it did. Caleb left shortly after, promising to return with firewood in the morning. Catherine spent the remaining daylight hours sweeping out the cabin, scrubbing surfaces with water she hauled from the creek in a borrowed bucket, and making the space marginally livable. Her trunk had been delivered to the porch, and she unpacked her few belongings, hanging her 2 other dresses on pegs by the door and arranging her books on the rickety shelf. As darkness fell, she lit the lamp and sat at the small table, exhaustion settling into her bones. The fire crackled in the stove, providing warmth and a surprising amount of comfort. Through the window, now covered with oiled paper Caleb had nailed in place, she could see stars beginning to emerge, more stars than she had ever seen in her life, scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. She thought of Caleb Stone, the mountain man who had appeared when she needed help most, who had asked for nothing in return, whose hands were scarred and strong but somehow gentle when handling tools. She thought of his eyes, the way they seemed to see more than she wanted to reveal. She thought of how completely out of place she felt in this wild country, and how natural he seemed, as much a part of the landscape as the mountains themselves. Sleep came fitfully on the narrow bed with its thin mattress, but when Catherine woke to pale dawn light filtering through the oiled paper windows, she felt something she had not expected. Hope. A sound outside brought her upright. She smoothed her dress and opened the door to find Caleb unloading what seemed like half a forest from a sturdy wagon, stacking wood with methodical precision. In the morning light, she could better appreciate the sheer size of him, the power in his arms and shoulders as he swung logs as if they weighed nothing. "Good morning," Catherine called out, feeling suddenly self-conscious in her wrinkled dress with her hair hastily pinned. Caleb looked up and nodded. "Morning. Brought enough wood to get you through until you can make other arrangements. Showed Horace at the store where to bill it." "I will pay you back," Catherine insisted. "I just said where to bill it. This is from my own stores. I cut more than I need for myself." He continued stacking the wood against the side of the cabin, creating a neat pile that reached above Catherine's waist. She watched him work for a moment, then made a decision. "I have coffee. Would you share breakfast with me before you leave? It is the least I can offer for your kindness." Caleb paused, and Catherine held her breath, uncertain why his answer mattered so much. "Coffee sounds good," he said finally. Inside the cabin, Catherine busied herself with the stove and her limited supplies. She had bread, butter, and some dried venison Horace had included with her provisions. It was not much, but she arranged it as nicely as possible on tin plates. The coffee pot began to percolate, filling the small space with its rich aroma. Caleb had to duck slightly to enter the doorway, and the cabin seemed to shrink around him. He removed his hat, revealing the full length of his hair, and Catherine found herself wondering what he would look like clean-shaven, then immediately scolding herself for the improper thought. They sat across from each other at the small table, and Catherine poured coffee into 2 chipped mugs. For a few minutes they ate in companionable silence, the only sounds the crackling fire and the morning songs of birds outside. "How long have you lived in the mountains?" Catherine asked finally. 8 years. Came out here after the war." His voice held a note of finality that suggested the war was not a topic for discussion. "Do you ever get lonely?" Caleb considered the question, his blue eyes studying the coffee in his mug. "Loneliness is better than being surrounded by people and feeling alone anyway. At least in the mountains, the solitude is honest." Catherine understood that better than she cared to admit. "That is why I left Philadelphia. I was lonely in a house full of people." "What about your family? They were all right with you coming out here alone?" "My mother died when I was 16. My father remarried a woman more interested in her own daughters than in me. When my engagement ended, I became something of an embarrassment. The offer to teach here seemed like a gift from Providence." "And the man you were engaged to, you loved him?" Catherine shook her head. "I thought I should love him. He was appropriate, respectable. But he did not want a wife. He wanted an ornament, someone to manage his household and bear his children while he continued his life exactly as before. I wanted more than that. I wanted to matter to someone." Caleb's gaze was steady and uncomfortably penetrating. "You matter here. Those kids need a teacher. If the town council does not dismiss me for being a woman, they would be fools to turn away someone willing to teach for what they are probably paying." Catherine smiled despite herself. "That is not exactly a ringing endorsement of my qualifications." "Did not mean it that way." Was that a hint of embarrassment in his expression? Meant that anyone willing to come all this way, to live in a leaky cabin and work for next to nothing, must really want to teach. That counts for something. They finished breakfast, and Caleb stood to leave. Catherine followed him to the door, suddenly reluctant to see him go. He was the only person in Silver Ridge who had shown her true kindness, and once he disappeared into those mountains, she would be completely alone. "How long will you be gone?" she asked. "Depends on the hunting and trapping. Could be a few weeks, could be a few months." He settled his hat on his head, adjusting it with one hand. "You need anything else before I go?" Catherine wanted to say yes, wanted to ask him to stay, to keep her company, to help her navigate this strange new world. Instead, she said, "You have done more than enough. Thank you, Caleb. Truly." He nodded, then seemed to hesitate, as if considering whether to say something more. Finally, he spoke. "Silver Ridge is rough, but most folks are decent enough. You run into real trouble, talk to the sheriff, man named Garrett. He is honest. And Horace at the store will help if you need supplies on credit until your first pay comes." "I will remember." Caleb turned to leave, took 3 steps, then stopped and looked back. "You will do fine out here, Catherine Hartwell. You have steel in you. I can see it." Then he was climbing into his wagon, releasing the brake and guiding his horses down the rutted path toward the mountains. Catherine stood in the doorway of her cabin and watched until he disappeared around a bend in the road, feeling as if something important was leaving with him. The next weeks tested every bit of the steel Caleb had seen in Catherine. She presented herself to the town council, a group of 5 men who met in the back room of the saloon and who regarded her with expressions ranging from bemusement to open skepticism. She argued her case with every bit of education and eloquence she possessed, produced her contract, and refused to be intimidated. In the end, they agreed to a trial period. She would open the school and teach for 1 month without pay. If the parents were satisfied and the children showed progress, they would honor her contract and provide back wages. It was fundamentally unfair, but Catherine had no choice but to accept. She spent 3 days cleaning the schoolhouse, which had been used to store mining equipment and smelled of rust and neglect. She scrubbed floors on her hands and knees, washed windows, and organized the few battered textbooks and slates she found in a cabinet. She made primer sheets by copying letters onto precious paper, created lesson plans, and tried not to think about how she would eat if the town council decided she was not suitable after all. On the first day of school, 6 children arrived, ranging in age from 5 to 13. They eyed her with suspicion and curiosity in equal measure, these children of miners and merchants, loggers and laborers. Catherine stood before them, her hands steady despite her nervousness, and introduced herself. "My name is Miss Hartwell, and I am here to help you learn," she said simply. "I know some of you may not have been to school before, or it has been a long time. That is all right. We will work together, and everyone will progress at their own pace. But I expect effort, respect, and curiosity. Can you give me those things?" The oldest boy, a gangly youth named Thomas with suspicious eyes, spoke up. "What do we need schooling for? I will be working in the mines same as my pa." "Perhaps you will," Catherine acknowledged, "but knowing how to read means you can understand your contracts, ensure you are paid fairly. Knowing mathematics means you can manage your wages, plan for the future. Knowledge is never wasted, Thomas. It is the one thing no one can take from you." She saw something shift in his expression, a grudging interest. The younger children were eager to learn their letters, fascinated by the globe she had brought from Philadelphia that showed them how vast the world truly was. Catherine threw herself into teaching with a passion that surprised even herself. She discovered she had a gift for making lessons engaging, for finding ways to connect book learning to the practical realities of frontier life. She taught mathematics through measuring and building projects. She taught reading through stories of Western exploration and adventure. She stayed late preparing lessons and arrived early to build the fire and make the schoolhouse welcoming. The parents began to take notice. More children arrived until she had 15 students of varying ages. Mothers thanked her in the general store. Fathers tipped their hats when she passed. At the end of the month, the town council called her in and gruffly informed her that she had passed their trial period. Her wages would begin immediately. Catherine walked back to her cabin that evening with her first month's wages clutched in her hand and tears of relief streaming down her face. She had done it. She had proven herself in this wild place. She belonged here. But as autumn deepened and the aspens turned gold against the dark green pines, Catherine found her thoughts turning with increasing frequency to Caleb Stone. She wondered where he was in those vast mountains, what he was doing, whether he was safe. She remembered the way his hands had moved so surely when building the fire, the quiet intelligence in his eyes, the sense of strength and safety she had felt in his presence. She told herself she was being foolish. He was a near stranger, a recluse who had shown her simple human kindness and nothing more. He had probably forgotten about her the moment his wagon reached the high country. She was inventing romance where none existed, a lonely woman projecting meaning onto a random act of helpfulness. But her heart refused to listen to logic. The first snow came in late October, a light dusting that melted by noon but promised harder weather ahead. Catherine was in the schoolhouse dismissing her students for the day when the door opened and Caleb walked in. Her heart leaped so violently that she actually pressed a hand to her chest, afraid he might see its wild beating through her dress. He looked different, somehow more elemental, his beard fuller, his hair longer, his skin even more weathered. He carried the cold of the high country with him, along with something wild and free that seemed barely contained within the schoolhouse walls. "Mr. Stone," Catherine managed, hoping her voice sounded normal. "What a surprise." "Brought down pelts to trade," Caleb said, his eyes moving around the schoolhouse, taking in the clean floors, the neat rows of desks, the slates covered in careful handwriting. "Heard in town that you got the position official. Congratulations." "Thank you. I had good help getting started." Catherine dismissed the last lingering child with a gentle reminder about tomorrow's lessons, then found herself alone with Caleb, the silence stretching between them. "Wanted to check that the cabin was holding up," Caleb continued, "that the roof patch was still good." "It has been perfect, dry as a palace." Catherine gathered papers with unnecessarily busy movements, unsure what to do with her hands. "Would you like to inspect your work? I have coffee at the cabin." "If it is not an imposition." They walked the short distance to the cabin side by side, not touching but hyper-aware of each other's presence. Catherine was conscious of how she must look after a long day of teaching, her hair escaping its pins, chalk dust on her skirt. She wanted to be beautiful for him, to be the kind of woman who might catch the eye of a man like Caleb Stone, and immediately felt ashamed of the shallow impulse. Inside the cabin, which was warm and significantly more homey than when Caleb had last seen it, Catherine set about making coffee. She had curtains now, sewn from flour sacks, and a rug braided from fabric scraps. Her books lined the shelf, and dried herbs hung from the rafters, filling the space with pleasant scents. It was humble, but undeniably hers. "You have made it into a home," Caleb observed, examining the roof patch from below with a critical eye. "I tried. It is the first place that has ever been truly mine." Catherine poured coffee and brought the mugs to the table. "Tell me about the mountains. Did you have a successful season?" Caleb accepted the coffee and sat, his large frame making the chair seem delicate. "Good season. Plenty of elk. Beaver pelts are prime. Winter will come early this year, though. I can feel it." "How can you tell?" "The animals are putting on fat faster than usual. The birds that migrate left 2 weeks earlier than last year. The aspens dropped their leaves all at once instead of gradual. Nature knows before we do." "That must be hard, being up there alone when winter truly sets in." Caleb was quiet for a moment, staring into his coffee. "Usually it does not bother me, but this year—" He trailed off, not finishing the thought. "But this year," Catherine prompted gently. He looked up at her then, and the intensity in his blue eyes made her breath catch. "This year I found myself wondering how things were going down here, whether you were managing all right, if the town council gave you trouble." "You were thinking about me?" The words came out barely above a whisper. "More than I should," Caleb admitted roughly. "More than is smart for a man like me." Catherine's heart was pounding so hard she felt dizzy. "Why is it not smart?" "Because I live in the wild. I am not made for settlements in society. Because you deserve better than a mountain man with nothing to offer but a hard life and loneliness." "You do not seem lonely to me," Catherine said softly. "You seem free." "There is a difference between choosing solitude and being afraid of anything else," Caleb said, his voice raw with honesty. "I went to the mountains because I could not stand to be around people after the war. Too much death, too much loss. The silence up there was the only thing that made sense. But lately, the silence has felt more like emptiness." Catherine reached across the table and placed her hand over his, marveling at how completely her fingers were engulfed by his. "I understand that better than you might think. I came here running from emptiness too, from being invisible in a crowd. But I'm learning that being alone and being lonely are not the same thing, and that sometimes the right person can make you feel less alone." Caleb turned his hand over, intertwining their fingers. His palm was calloused and warm, strong enough to crush, but holding her with infinite gentleness. "I should not do this," he said. "Should not start something I do not know how to finish." "Maybe we can figure it out together," Catherine suggested, her voice trembling slightly with the boldness of her words. They sat like that for a long moment, hands clasped across the table, coffee growing cold in their mugs. Finally, Caleb stood, drawing Catherine up with him. He was so tall that she had to tilt her head back to look at him, and being this close, she could smell the pine and leather scent of him, could see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes. "I am not a man who knows pretty words," Caleb said, his free hand coming up to cup her face with surprising tenderness. "But I have not been able to stop thinking about you since the day I met you. You with your stubborn chin and your determination to make a place for yourself in this hard country. You are braver than you know, Catherine." "I am terrified," Catherine admitted, "of failing, of being sent away, of never mattering to anyone. But when you are here, I feel less afraid." "I am terrified too," Caleb confessed, "of caring about someone again, of having something to lose. But I cannot seem to help it where you are concerned." He bent down slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, but Catherine rose on her toes to meet him halfway. The kiss was gentle at first, almost tentative, his beard soft against her skin. Then something ignited between them, and the kiss deepened, became urgent, full of longing and need. Catherine's arms went around his neck, and Caleb pulled her close against his chest, one arm wrapped completely around her waist, lifting her nearly off her feet. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "I should go," he said, though he made no move to release her. "You should," Catherine agreed, not stepping back. "I'm staying in town for a few days, trading pelts, getting supplies." He hesitated. "Could I see you again tomorrow?" "I would like that very much." Caleb did finally leave, but not before kissing her once more at the door, a kiss that promised things Catherine hardly dared to imagine. She closed the door behind him and leaned against it, her hand pressed to her lips, feeling more alive than she had in her entire 22 years. Over the next 3 days, Catherine and Caleb spent every moment they could together. He came to the schoolhouse after lessons and walked her home. They talked about everything and nothing, discovering the shape of each other's thoughts. Caleb told her about his life before the mountains, about growing up on a farm in Missouri, about the horrors he had seen in the war that had driven him to seek solitude. Catherine shared her own story more fully, the slow suffocation of her life in Philadelphia, the moment she had realized she would rather die alone in the wilderness than live invisibly in society. They discovered they both loved reading, though Caleb had not touched a book in years. Catherine lent him her precious copy of Whitman's poetry, and he read it by lamplight in his rented room above the livery, the words speaking to something in him he had thought long dead. They discovered they both had lost their mothers young. Both understood the particular loneliness of being surrounded by family, yet fundamentally alone. On the third evening, Caleb took Catherine to a meadow just outside of town as the sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple. They sat on a fallen log, Catherine tucked against his side with his arm around her shoulders, and watched the day surrender to night. "I have to go back up the mountain tomorrow," Caleb said quietly. "Need to secure my cabin before the heavy snows come, put up enough game to last the winter." Catherine had known this was coming, but still felt her throat tighten. "How long will you be gone?" 2 months at least, maybe longer depending on the weather. Winter's up there. You can get snowed in for weeks at a time. "That is a long time." She tried to keep her voice steady. "Too long," Caleb agreed. He turned to face her, his hands coming up to frame her face. "Come with me." Catherine blinked, certain she had misheard. "What?" "Come with me to the high country. Not forever, not yet. Just for a while. Let me show you my world. Let me have this time with you before winter locks everything down." "I cannot. I have school. The children depend on me. It is Saturday tomorrow. You have the weekend. I am not asking you to abandon your responsibilities. Just asking for 2 days. 2 days for us before I have to leave." Catherine knew she should refuse. It was improper, possibly dangerous, certainly scandalous if anyone found out. But when she looked into Caleb's eyes and saw the vulnerability there, the hope and fear mingled together, she found herself nodding. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will come with you." The joy that blazed across Caleb's face was worth any risk. He kissed her then, deep and claiming, and Catherine kissed him back with equal fervor, pouring into it all the words she was not quite ready to say. They left before dawn the next morning, Caleb helping Catherine into his wagon loaded with supplies. She had told Horace at the store that she was visiting a nearby settlement for the weekend, a lie that sat uncomfortably but necessarily on her conscience. As they rolled out of Silver Ridge, heading toward the mountains that glowed pink with the rising sun, Catherine felt a thrill of adventure mixed with trepidation. The road, such as it was, grew rougher as they climbed. The wagon jolted over rocks and ruts, and the forest pressed close on either side, thick pines that blocked out much of the sky. They crossed streams on precarious log bridges and skirted cliffs that made Catherine's heart race. But Caleb drove with complete confidence, his hands steady on the reins, and gradually Catherine relaxed, trusting him to keep them safe. They talked as they traveled, or sometimes sat in companionable silence, simply enjoying each other's presence. Caleb pointed out animal tracks in the soft earth beside the trail, identified birds by their calls, showed her a beaver dam that had created a small pond reflecting the blue sky. This was his world, Catherine realized, and he was sharing it with her the way she shared books and ideas, offering what was most precious to him. It was late afternoon when they reached Caleb's cabin, and Catherine caught her breath at the beauty of it. The structure sat in a high meadow surrounded by towering peaks, a small creek running nearby, aspens scattered among the evergreens. The cabin itself was larger than she had expected, built from sturdy logs with a stone chimney and a covered porch. It looked like it had grown from the mountain itself, as natural as the trees and rocks. "This is beautiful," Catherine breathed, climbing down from the wagon with Caleb's help. "Built it myself over 3 summers, Caleb said, pride evident in his voice. "Wanted it done right to last." Inside was a single large room with a sleeping loft above. The furnishings were simple but well crafted, everything clearly made by Caleb's own hands. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with cooking implements hanging nearby. Furs and hides covered the floor and the wide bed in the corner, providing insulation and comfort. Books lined a shelf, surprising Catherine with their number and variety. A window looked out over the meadow, framing the mountains beyond like a painting. "It is a home," Catherine said softly. "A real home." "It was a shelter," Caleb corrected. "A place to hide. But lately I have been thinking it could be more. Could be a home if the right person was here to share it." He was looking at her as he said it, and Catherine felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Caleb, I know it is too soon," he said quickly. "I know we have only known each other a short time, but I have lived long enough to recognize something rare when I find it. You are rare, Catherine, and I'm asking you to consider a future here, with me." Catherine walked to the window, looking out at the wild beauty that surrounded them. Everything in her Philadelphia upbringing screamed that this was madness, that she barely knew this man, that respectable women did not run off to isolated cabins with mountain men. But that same upbringing had nearly trapped her in a loveless marriage and a life of suffocating pretense. "What would it look like, this future?" she asked, not turning around. Caleb came up behind her, not touching but close enough that she could feel his warmth. "You keep teaching. Those kids need you, and I would never ask you to give that up. But when school is not in session, you come here. We spend the summers and holidays in the high country. Maybe eventually we build a place closer to town, somewhere between my world and yours. We make our own life, by our own rules. People will talk. Let them. It will not be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever is." Catherine turned to face him, searching his face. "You're serious about this, about us." "More serious than I have been about anything in 8 years." He took her hands in his. "I'm not asking for an answer now. I'm just asking you to think about it, to spend this weekend with me and see if you can imagine it too. And if I can, if I want the same thing, then we figure out the details together. We take it slow if we need to. We find a way to make it work." He brought her hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles with a gentleness that made her heart ache. "I'm done running, Catherine. Done hiding in these mountains. You made me remember there are things worth coming down for, things worth risking a heart I thought was too broken to love again." Tears pricked Catherine's eyes. "My heart is not broken. It has just been waiting for the right person to give it to." "And is that person me?" Caleb asked, vulnerability naked in his voice. "Yes," Catherine whispered. "I think it might be." The kiss that followed was different from the others, slower and deeper, a promise rather than a question. Caleb lifted Catherine in his arms as easily as if she weighed nothing, carrying her to the bed piled with furs. He laid her down gently, his eyes asking permission, even as his body made his desire clear. "We do not have to," he said roughly. "I can sleep on the floor. I did not bring you here for this." Catherine reached up and pulled him down to her. "I know why you brought me here, and I came knowing what I wanted. I want you, Caleb Stone. All of you. I want this." What followed was a discovery of each other, tentative at first, then with growing confidence and passion. Caleb was gentle despite his size, infinitely patient, his hands on her skin both reverent and hungry. Catherine gave herself to him completely, without reservation, knowing in her bones that this was right. Whatever happened tomorrow or next week or next year, this moment was real and true, and theirs alone. Afterward, they lay tangled together beneath the firs, the last sunlight streaming through the window and painting their skin gold. Caleb traced lazy patterns on Catherine's bare shoulder, and she counted the scars on his chest, each one a story she wanted to learn. "I love you," Catherine said quietly, surprising herself with the words, but knowing they were true. "I know it is too soon and probably foolish, but I do. I love you." Caleb pulled her closer, his lips against her hair. Not foolish, not too soon, just right. He tilted her face up to his. "I love you too, Catherine Hartwell. Did not think I was capable of it anymore. But you proved me wrong. You proved me wrong about a lot of things." They spent the weekend in a blissful bubble removed from the world. Caleb showed Catherine how to fish in the creek, laughing when she squealed at her first catch. She read poetry to him as he skinned and prepared game for his winter stores, her voice filling the cabin with beauty. They made love by firelight and talked until dawn, learning the landscape of each other's souls. They discussed plans and dreams, obstacles and possibilities, building the framework of a shared future. On Sunday afternoon, as they loaded the wagon to return to Silver Ridge, Catherine felt a pang of loss so sharp it was almost physical. She did not want to leave this mountain paradise, did not want to return to the complications and judgments of town. But she had responsibilities, students who depended on her, a life she had worked hard to build. "I will come back," Caleb said, reading her expression as he had become adept at doing. "Soon as I can, I will come back to you, and we will figure out the rest. Promise?" "I promise." The ride down the mountain was quieter than the journey up, both of them lost in thought. As Silver Ridge came into view, Catherine felt herself tensing, preparing to slip back into the role of Miss Hartwell, proper schoolteacher. Caleb must have felt it too, because he reached over and squeezed her hand. "Nothing changes," he said firmly. "What we have, what we are to each other, that does not change just because we are back in town. People will find out eventually. Then they find out. I am not ashamed of loving you, Catherine. I will never be ashamed of that." His words warmed her, gave her courage. Caleb left her at her cabin with a kiss that promised he meant every word he had said. Then he was gone again, heading back up the mountain to secure his home for winter, and Catherine was alone once more. But it was a different kind of alone now. She carried Caleb with her, in her heart and her thoughts. She moved through her days teaching and tending to her duties, but part of her mind was always in the high country, wondering what he was doing, counting the days until he would return. November arrived with bitter cold and the first serious snow. Catherine kept the schoolhouse warm and her lessons engaging, watching her students flourish under her care. She grew closer to some of the mothers in town, women who appreciated having a teacher who truly cared about their children. She made friends cautiously, still holding part of herself apart, guarding her secret. It was nearly December when Caleb finally returned, arriving in the middle of a school day and simply standing in the back of the room, snowflakes melting in his hair and beard. Catherine stumbled over her lesson when she saw him, her heart leaping into her throat. She somehow managed to finish the day without completely losing her composure, though several of the older students shot curious glances between her and the large mountain man at the back of the room. When the last child had left, Catherine stood behind her desk, suddenly uncertain. Caleb walked forward slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. "Missed you," he said simply. "I missed you too, every single day. I tried to stay away longer, told myself you needed space, needed time to think about what you really wanted. But I could not. Had to see you, had to know you were all right. I'm more than all right now that you are here." Catherine came around the desk, not caring about propriety, and walked straight into his arms. He held her tightly, and she felt herself relax completely for the first time in weeks. "I brought something for you," Caleb said after a long moment. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small wrapped package. Catherine opened it carefully to find a delicate necklace made of intricately carved wood, each small bead a different mountain wildflower. "Caleb, this is beautiful. Did you make this?" "Gave me something to do during the long evenings. Wanted you to have a piece of the high country with you." He helped her fasten it around her neck, his fingers gentle at her nape. "I love it. I will wear it always." They walked to her cabin together, no longer trying to hide their connection. If people stared, let them stare. Inside, Catherine made dinner while Caleb rebuilt her fire, and they fell into an easy domestic rhythm that felt utterly natural. "I have been thinking about what comes next," Caleb said over the meal. "If you are still willing to consider a future with me." "I have thought of little else," Catherine admitted. "The town needs a sawmill. There is good timber on land I could claim, and the location is right. I could build the mill, run it during the warm months, still trap in winter but stay closer to town. It would not be easy, would take time to establish, but it could work. I could be near you." Catherine's heart swelled with love for this man who was willing to reshape his entire life to make room for her in it. "You would give up your solitude for me?" "It is not giving up anything. It is choosing something better, choosing you, choosing us. The mountains will always be there when I need them, but I do not want to live my whole life alone anymore, not when I could be with you." "What about marriage?" Catherine asked quietly. "I know we have not discussed it directly, but if we are going to build a life together—" "I want to marry you," Caleb said immediately. "Want it more than I have wanted anything. But I did not want to pressure you. Did not want you to feel obligated." "Obligated?" Catherine laughed. "Caleb, I love you. I want to be your wife, want to build this life you are describing. I just needed to know you wanted the same thing." Caleb was out of his chair and around the table in one smooth movement, pulling Catherine to her feet. "Marry me, Catherine Hartwell. Let me spend the rest of my life proving I am worthy of you. You already are worthy, and yes, I will marry you." The kiss was deep and passionate, full of promise and joy. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "We should do it soon," he said, "before winter gets too harsh. We can have a simple ceremony, just us and whoever you want there. I do not need anything elaborate. I just need you." They decided on a date 2 weeks away, giving them time to make simple arrangements. Caleb would stay in town until then, helping Catherine prepare and starting the process of claiming land for his sawmill. He moved into the small room above the livery again, though he spent every evening at Catherine's cabin, and the entire town began to understand that the schoolteacher and the mountain man were courting. The reaction was mixed. Some of the town women clucked their tongues and whispered about impropriety, but others, particularly those who had seen how good Catherine was with their children, were supportive. Horace at the general store offered his parlor for the wedding. The sheriff, true to Caleb's description of him, congratulated them and offered to stand as witness. The day of the wedding dawned clear and cold, the sky a brilliant blue that seemed to promise good things. Catherine dressed in her best dress, a simple green that matched her eyes, and pinned her hair with extra care. She had no jewelry except the necklace Caleb had made her, which she wore like a talisman. When she walked into Horace's parlor and saw Caleb waiting for her, her breath caught. He had trimmed his beard and his hair was pulled back, tied with a leather thong. He wore clean clothes, likely new for the occasion, and he looked at her as if she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. The ceremony was simple, the words traditional, but the emotion behind them was profound. When Caleb slipped a simple gold band on Catherine's finger, his hand trembled slightly. When she promised to love and cherish him, her voice broke with the weight of her sincerity. And when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was tender and full of promise. Horace had arranged a small reception, and several townspeople had brought food to share. It was not the elaborate Philadelphia wedding Catherine's father would have insisted upon, but it was real and warm, surrounded by people who genuinely wished them well. Catherine found herself laughing more than she had in years, tucked against Caleb's side, his arm around her waist, claiming her as his before the entire town. As the sun set and the celebration wound down, Caleb and Catherine walked back to her cabin through the snow. Tomorrow they would begin the practical work of building their life together, but tonight was theirs alone. Inside, with the fire crackling and snow falling softly outside the window, Caleb lifted Catherine in his arms and carried her to the bed. They made love slowly, savoring each touch, learning the new dimension that being married brought to their physical connection. This was not stolen time, not a weekend escape. This was forever, a promise written in the language of their bodies. Later, Catherine lay with her head on Caleb's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and felt peace settle over her like a warm blanket. "I was so scared when I got off that train," she murmured. "I thought I had made the worst mistake of my life. And now? Now I know it was the best decision I ever made, because it brought me to you." Caleb's arms tightened around her. "I was dead inside before you arrived, going through the motions of living but not really feeling anything. You woke me up, made me remember what it was to hope, to want something beyond just surviving." "We saved each other," Catherine said softly. "Yes, I suppose we did." Winter deepened, and Catherine continued teaching while Caleb made preparations for the sawmill. He filed claims on timberland and began cutting logs, stockpiling them for when he could start construction in the spring. It was hard physical labor, and he came home each evening exhausted but satisfied, a man working toward a future rather than hiding from the past. They settled into married life with surprising ease. Catherine cooked meals on the small stove, while Caleb did repairs around the cabin, winterizing it properly. They read together in the evenings, Caleb rediscovering his love of books through Catherine's extensive collection. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. They made love with increasing passion and familiarity, learning what pleased each other. When the worst of winter hit and snow piled waist-high outside, they were warm and safe inside their little cabin, a world unto themselves. Catherine would watch Caleb by firelight, his strong hands whittling or mending tools, and marvel that this man was hers, that she had been brave enough to step off that train and into an unknown future. "What are you thinking?" Caleb asked one evening, catching her staring. "That I love you, that I am happy, that I never knew life could be this good." He set aside his work and pulled her into his lap, kissing her thoroughly. "It is only going to get better, I promise. Wait until spring when I can take you back up to the high country. Wait until we have our sawmill running and can build a proper house. Wait until we fill that house with children and laughter." "Children," Catherine repeated softly. "You want children?" "Only if you do. But yes, I would love to have children with you, little ones with your intelligence and hopefully my ability to not fall off horses." Catherine laughed, but tears pricked her eyes. "I would love that too, a family of our own." "Then that is what we will have. We will build it together, piece by piece, same as we are building everything else." Spring came slowly to the mountains, the snow retreating inch by stubborn inch. But when it finally arrived, it was glorious. The meadows exploded with wildflowers, and the creeks ran high with snowmelt. Caleb began in earnest on the sawmill, working from dawn until dusk, and Catherine helped when school let out for the summer break. True to his word, Caleb took Catherine up to the high country for a week, showing her his world in its summer glory. They hiked through alpine meadows thick with columbine and lupine, fished in crystal streams, and made love under the stars. Catherine fell more deeply in love with both the man and his mountains, understanding why he had sought refuge there, grateful he had chosen to leave them for her. The sawmill was finished by late summer, a source of pride for both of them. Caleb had built it with his own hands, and Catherine had helped where she could, learning to handle tools and timber with increasing confidence. The mill would provide lumber for the growing town and income to support their growing family. Because Catherine was pregnant. She discovered it in early fall, the signs unmistakable once she paid attention. When she told Caleb, his face transformed with wonder and joy. He placed his large hands on her still flat belly with infinite gentleness, and Catherine saw tears in his eyes for the first time. "A baby," he said hoarsely. "Our baby. Are you happy?" Happy does not begin to cover it. He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "I thought I would spend my life alone. Now I have you and soon a child. It is more than I deserve, more than I ever dreamed possible." The pregnancy was easier than Catherine had feared, and she taught through most of it, only stopping when her belly grew too large to comfortably move between desks. The women of Silver Ridge, many of whom had warmed to her considerably over the past year, offered advice and hand-me-down baby clothes. Caleb was attentive to the point of being comical, constantly worried about her health and comfort. In late March of 1877, Catherine went into labor on a blustery afternoon. Caleb paced outside while the doctor and two experienced mothers attended Catherine inside. It was long and difficult, and Caleb wore a path in the snow with his worried walking, but when the baby's cry finally pierced the air, he nearly broke the door down trying to get inside. Catherine lay exhausted but radiant in the bed, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up at Caleb with tears streaming down her face and smiled. "A boy," she said. "We have a son." Caleb approached slowly, as if afraid he might break something, and looked down at the impossibly small infant. The baby had a shock of dark hair and a red, angry face, tiny fists waving at the injustice of being born. Caleb reached out one large finger, and the baby's hand wrapped around it with surprising strength. He is perfect," Caleb whispered. "Absolutely perfect." "Would you like to hold him?" Caleb looked terrified. "What if I drop him?" "You will not drop him. Come, sit here." Catherine shifted over, and Caleb sat gingerly on the edge of the bed. She placed the baby in his arms, showing him how to support the small head. Caleb held his son with exquisite care, this man whose hands were strong enough to fell trees, now cradling a newborn as if he were made of glass. Catherine watched them together, her husband and her son, and felt her heart might burst from the love filling it. "What should we name him?" Caleb asked, not taking his eyes off the baby. "I was thinking James after your father." Caleb looked up sharply, surprise and emotion crossing his face. "You remember me mentioning that?" "I remember everything you tell me. James Stone. It is a good, strong name." "James," Caleb repeated, testing it out. "Yes, James it is." He looked at Catherine, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Thank you. For him. For you. For this life. Thank you for coming off that train looking for something better and giving me the chance to be that for you." "You are better than I ever dreamed," Catherine said softly, echoing the sentiment that had carried her through the past year. "So much better." The years that followed were not without challenges. The sawmill had good seasons and lean ones. Catherine returned to teaching part-time, bringing James with her when he was small, later leaving him with trusted neighbors. They faced harsh winters and difficult summers, the usual trials of frontier life, but they faced them together. 2 years after James was born, Catherine delivered a daughter they named Sarah, who had her mother's green eyes and her father's stubborn determination. 3 years after that came another son, Michael, who was laughing before he could walk and could charm anyone into anything. Caleb expanded the sawmill and built the house he had promised, large enough for their growing family, with windows that looked out at the mountains he still loved. He took the children up to the high country every summer, teaching them the skills his father had taught him, sharing his love of the wilderness that had once been his refuge. Catherine continued teaching when she could, taking breaks for babies, but always returning to the schoolhouse that had been her salvation. She watched Silver Ridge grow from a rough settlement into a proper town, saw her students become adults who remembered Miss Hartwell, now Mrs. Stone, with affection and gratitude. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Caleb and Catherine stood on the porch of their house, watching their 3 children play in the meadow. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple, the same colors as that evening so long ago when he had asked her to come with him to take a chance on what they might build together. "Do you ever regret it?" Caleb asked, his arm around Catherine's waist. "Coming here, marrying me, choosing this life?" Catherine leaned into him, fitting perfectly against his side as she always had. "Not for a single moment. This is exactly where I am supposed to be. I love you, Catherine Stone, more now than the day I married you, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. I love you too, my mountain man, my partner, my home." James called out something from the meadow, and Sarah's laughter rang clear as bells. Michael was attempting to climb a tree with more enthusiasm than skill, and Caleb sighed with fond exasperation. "I should probably stop him before he breaks something," he said. "Probably," Catherine agreed, "but give him another minute. He will figure it out." like his mother, stubborn and determined to do things his own way. He gets that from both of us, I think. They stood together a moment longer, watching the life they had built, the family they had created. Catherine thought back to that frightened young woman who had stepped off the train with everything she owned in a single carpet bag, looking for something better, for a place to belong. She had found so much more than that. She had found purpose, community, and love deeper than she had imagined possible. She had found a man strong enough to carry timber, but gentle enough to cradle babies, brave enough to face wilderness, but vulnerable enough to admit he needed her. She had found her place in the world, not despite coming to the Wild West, but because of it. "We should go help Michael before he actually does fall," Caleb said reluctantly. "Together," Catherine said, taking his hand. "Always together," Caleb agreed. They walked down from the porch into the golden evening light toward their children and the life that sprawled before them, full of promise and possibility. Behind them, the mountains stood eternal, witnessing this small human happiness, this family carved out of loneliness and courage, this love that had bloomed in unlikely soil and taken deep, unshakable root. Catherine had come off the train looking for a better man than the one she had left behind. She had found a mountain man who was better than she had ever dreamed possible. And together, they had built something that would last longer than the mountains themselves, a legacy of love passed down to their children and their children's children, a story that began with a frightened woman and a solitary man and blossomed into a family, a life, a forever. The sun set completely, and stars began to emerge, the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss, their wedding, the birth of each child. The night wrapped around them warm and familiar, full of the sounds of home, children's laughter, Caleb's deep voice, Catherine's gentle corrections. Inside the house, lamplight glowed yellow and welcoming, promising warmth and food and the comfort of being exactly where they belonged. This was their story, their truth. The schoolteacher who came west looking for purpose, and the mountain man who needed someone to bring him back to life. They had found each other in the wild country, had built a life from determination and love, had proven that the best things in life are worth risking everything for. And as Catherine tucked her children into bed that night, kissing each small forehead and listening to their prayers, as Caleb banked the fire and checked the locks and did all the small things that made them safe, as they climbed into their own bed and held each other in the darkness, Catherine sent up her own prayer of gratitude. She had come looking for better. She had found best, and she would spend the rest of her days grateful for the courage that had brought her west, for the train that had carried her to Silver Ridge, for the mountain man who had appeared when she needed him most and stayed to build a lifetime. This was happy. This was home. This was everything she had ever wanted, and more than she had ever dared to dream. And it was only the beginning of forever.